Could you shut the door? Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to General and Housing of the House of Representatives. Today is Tuesday, the 25th of February, and we are hearing, first of all, from our esteemed Legislative Counsel, Ellen Tchaikovsky, and then we will hear from John Groveman from the NRC. Ellen, I think you know the committee, so I don't think we will have to reintroduce ourselves to you. So take it away. Would you like to put the bill up behind you?
I'm not planning to, no.
Okay. We have hard copies of it.
Yes. So Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel, I'm here today on draft 3.1 of your committee bill, which is 25 draft 838. So this is the committee bill that you have, I think, previously heard from Cameron on. Today I brought you draft 3.1, which is a new version from the last one you saw because I hadn't spoken to the chair about what exact piece of languages he wanted included in the first walkthrough with me. So I have some slightly different language than is what in draft 1.1 and 2.1. I can talk to you about the prior drafts, but this is where I was going to start today. And so as a reminder, I am the attorney that handles land use as well as energy and climate change. And so my sections of this bill start on page 18, starting with section 11 of draft 3.1. And it covers a few different topics. So the first section that I'm going to start with is section 11 of this bill. So this is an amendment to 24 VSA 4471. This is an language regarding appeals of municipal panel decisions, so usually zoning permits, to the Environmental Division of the Superior Court. So the chair had asked for two pieces of language that I think fit into this section. One is regarding standard of proof in such cases, and then also priority for hearing of housing appeals. And so I think you've heard some information previously about these topics, but I will talk more about them. So the first change that's being made here is that it's adding a new subdivision F. So except cases the court considers of greater importance, proceedings involving development of residential housing. I highlighted that because I want to make sure we have the exact term that you're interested in limiting this to. Before the Environmental Division of the Superior Court, onto page 19, and appeals therefrom take precedent on the docket over all other cases and shall be assigned for hearing and trial or for argument at the earliest practicable date and expedited in every way. So this is language that is about priority for the environmental court to hear appeals of housing permits. I think this is the same language that is in the governor's proposal.
Can I ask a quick
Please,
question?
go ahead.
Residential housing as opposed to what other, is that a silly question?
No, and
What
that's
else could that language?
so that's why I highlighted it.
Okay.
So there isn't necessarily always consistency of terms in this space.
Mhm.
And so I do think this may have been the phrasing from the governor's bill.
Okay,
And so under Act 250, housing can either be for a residential purpose or a commercial purpose.
Oh,
Yes.
what is commercial housing?
It's when it's owned either by the developer at initial stages or by a landlord. And so residential refers to a home owned by the one who's living in it.
I do think I'd like the committees, my view is we want it broader than that.
I want it for all
We want it
housing.
for all housing.
Yep.
Because so much of housing now that's key is developed at a multifamily rental.
Yep.
So we want it for all housing.
Yep.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. One other question about this section or two. One is, I just want to ask again. In a district which doesn't have zoning or has very rudimentary zoning and all that, and let's say housing is as of right. So all they need is a building permit. They don't even get a zoning permit. Is that appealable to the environmental division?
Yes,
Okay,
I believe so. I don't normally work on building permits specifically, so I actually don't know a ton about that procedure. So I don't. So I'm I should back up. I'm assuming there's an appeal. I don't know 100%.
okay.
I do think you asked me that question last time and I don't know the answer.
I don't know Vermont land use law as well as you do, I'm sure, but I'm thinking that in districts where we really said housing is as of right. It may be that when there's conforming amendments, there's nothing but a building permit. That there's no DRB review because it's as of right, like a single family house is in a single family district. You just go in and get a building permit, or in some towns, you don't, you just go build. But that's why I asked that question. But it wouldn't go anywhere else, would it? I mean,
I can't answer the question.
okay, all righty. Also, do you have experience with other bills that say take precedence? I'm just assuming this term means what the courts in their administrative capacity take it to me, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I do think when you're looking at directing the court on their own internal procedures, you do run the risk of them saying you're violating the separation of powers here. We have the authority to set our own internal procedures on how we take up cases. In the past, so I would say I don't know if I've ever drafted anything like this with the precedents. Last year, there was a provision passed setting a goal that the environmental division hear cases in within a certain number of days after it's been filed. So I do think this is a little unusual.
Okay. I suspect that by not having a day goals, it would just saying take precedence, it leaves a lot of how they administer that to them, but I'm not sure. Go ahead.
So the next piece of language is subsection G. So I'm on page 19, line 4. And so this is actually on a different topic, but I do think they both fit in this section. So a party appealing a land use decision shall demonstrate a clear and substantial departure from the comprehensive plan or land use regulation that directly affects the property. So this language was also from the governor's proposal. This is about changing either the standing or the standard of review about how the court evaluates whether or not someone can even bring an appeal. So I would say that so this was what was originally proposed. I actually have sort of a counter, an alternative section 11 that I think could address this slightly differently with language. But that is the initial proposal. And I think part of the reason this language is a little confusing to me is whether or not it is a provision on standing or on the standard of review that the court does. And so this really gets into court procedure. And I think as you work on this, you'll want to hear from attorneys that actually do litigate, because I do not. But when a person is seeking to bring a lawsuit, there is an initial question of if they have standing, which is only certain people are allowed to bring cases before a court. They have to have, that's what we call standing. They have to demonstrate that they're either given that ability in statute, or if there's some, if they have had an injury under the statute that would be protected and needs to be brought in a lawsuit. And there are other elements that are specifically laid out in court precedent that talk more about this. But that is one way to sort of limit who gets to bring an appeal of a case, is whether or not that person even has standing. The other way that you could look at this issue is what I'm proposing in the next section, which is the standard of review for the case. And so I do think you need to think about what step in the procedure of the case you want to bring this. So whether or not someone has the ability to bring a lawsuit through having standing, the next step is when the court hears the case, they have a standard of review. And that, I think when I was in here last, we talked about a little bit, which is, are they reviewing everything as part of the case? Or are they looking more in a limited way at what happened at the lower body that issued the permit? And so there are different levels of that type of review that you can look at. And so here in G, they're trying to bring in some language about demonstrating a clear and substantial departure from the law in regards to the permit that's been issued. And so I think that that looks at more of the standard of review, but I do think you could potentially structure it differently. I think they're trying to get at standing here, which is a little bit confusing.
I agree. I think that I read this, two thoughts about this. I think G is the attempt in the governor's draft. You don't even have as a bill, but we've heard to address what I would call standard of review. They didn't, but I would. It says, once you're in, what do you have to prove? And in that regard, before we get to standing, in that regard, and you're saying you're not wild about this language yet. Have you seen the language I sent you from, that came from the VNRC?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm fine with separating, because for clarity purposes, the standard review, which is once you're in the door, what do you have to prove? And saying something like this, I think you should look at the VNRC language, and John is here, he'll testify. Can you stay a little and listen to this? Okay.
Yep.
I think the one thing you might think about when you redraft, which I think, I would very much like you to do, following your thoughts about it after you look at theirs. You want it to work either way. We're going to get appeals by disgruntled citizens, or we're going to get appeals from disgruntled developers who are unhappy with the denial. And it has to work either way. And I'm not sure I think this language was written only contemplating the former, not the latter.
I agree. So actually in this, I did make one small tweak, which is on line 6. So in the governor's version, and I think what was in your draft 1.1, it said directly affects their property.
I know, I took that out.
So I changed it to the property because
I
if you're
took actually that phrase
took the
out,
whole phrase out, okay,
because I
Yeah.
think you're right.
Yeah.
That refers to standing,
yeah,
not to a standard of review.
Yeah. yeah.
Okay, so I would urge you to take another crack at this as soon as you can, in light of the testimony we're about to hear, with that in mind.
Sure. So my crack on it is at the next section, next section.
Okay, go
Yeah.
ahead. I thought that was a standing section.
No, so starting on page 19, but the new language is on page 20, I'm offering an alternative to that.
Okay.
And so
great.
this is in the statute in Title 10, Section 8504. And this is actually in the Environmental Division's Standard of Review section.
So there is a standard of review section.
There is.
Okay,
And so, also, if anyone else needs a little more detail on everything we're talking about, please slow me down because we're talking about very deep legal procedure right now. So currently in the Environmental Division statute, there is this provision that says de novo.
right.
So the Environmental Division, applying the substantive standards that were applicable before the tribunal appealed from, shall hold a de novo hearing on those issues that have been appealed, except for. And so this is saying that generally the Environmental Division hears every case that comes before it de novo, which hears it anew, here's the full case presented by both sides. With
Oh, I see.
the
So you
exception of the
added
same
a-
standards.
You added a section 3.
Yes, and so currently there's an exception to this rule for decisions by towns that hold it on the record.
Yeah.
And so we talked about that a little bit. It's a slightly more formal procedure that towns would need to hold. And then there's also this specific provision about decisions by the Commissioner of Forest Parks and Rec. And that is a specific section that they have the ability to hold on the appeals on the record. And then, yes, on the top of page 20, I've added additional language about what we were just talking about. So a decision by an appropriate municipal panel regarding a housing development, in which case to prevail, a prevailing party, in which to prevail, a party appealing the decision shall demonstrate a clear and substantial departure from the municipal bylaw or land use regulation that directly affects the property. So that is not specifically an on the record
Right.
standard. It's a little bit of a hybrid. But you also could clarify additional details if you're looking for something other than clear and substantial.
I think, just to clarify for the committee, we heard one of the bills on our wall is a bill to have a housing court. And we had a discussion of de novo review there. And one of the things that came out was de novo review substantially lengthens the time of hearings, results in trial-like behavior with all kinds of stuff. We had the Land Use Review Board in here, and they testified that they were looking hard in this study that they're doing, which is currently due on January 15th, 2026, and we hope to move back to November so that we could actually get a bill to Legislative Council, God willing, on or before the 1st of December. But anyway, it was clear that that's one of the things that they're going to look at. And so we didn't deal with the de novo review problem that is an existing problem. But this is a standard of proof. And you're just saying it's very similar in language. We just like to put it here.
Yeah,
Okay.
for clarity for both the courts. And I think it makes it a little more clear that it's a standard of review as opposed to a standing.
I'm comfortable with that. I don't know. Just for further drafting, right, is the committee comfortable with putting the language here on the recommendation of Ledge Council, that regardless of what it ends up being, that it just go in this section?
You're asking if,
I'm sorry.
no, I didn't read it. But you're asking to have it in that section.
Yeah, just for the next draft that's produced, but without commenting yet on how we feel about all this. Just,
Reasonable.
I think we could just do that.
I'm just confused. I'm not sure. I mean, obviously aside from the fact that it's different wording,
Not much.
I haven't heard why it needs to be in one section over another.
Sure, so the chair, okay, so I think what it was the initial proposal was from the administration about how can you put some guardrails on who is approving housing permits? And so they've proposed this language in G, and it was unclear to me if it was supposed to be about standing.
Which is who,
Yep,
as opposed to what you have to
Exactly.
demonstrate.
Perfectly
Yeah.
said.
Okay.
and so for clarity in reading, I am proposing to move it
To the what?
to the what, yes.
Got it.
And
Okay.
I only am proposing that because the chair asked if I could clarify it in some way.
Yep.
And that is my proposal. There are other ways that you could structure it. I think VNRC is going to propose a slightly different way to structure it. So there are other ways that you could do this, but the committee should think about what is your goal? Is it about limiting the who or limiting the what?
And I'm proposing, but it's just my proposal to put before the committee both.
Yeah.
That is to put before the committee. Have you drafted a standing section?
I don't think I did.
Okay.
Can't wait.
There, I think,
Oh, the next, actually, yes, I did. The next provision, it says it right there. See, I'm all.
oh, yes, you did.
I did.
Such an overachiever.
You've been in too many committees.
There's been a lot of emails back and forth about exactly what is being sought to do. And so, yes, the next section on page 20, which I've labeled section 12, is a slightly different take on standing. So it is similar, but it is a slightly different take on standing, so limiting who can appeal municipal permit decisions. So in the municipal permit decision statute, there is this section called the interested persons. So an interested person is the only person who can appeal a municipal permit decision. And there are a few different types that are listed. And this committee did work on this last year. But I have made in this draft 2 different changes as the chair requested. So in subdivision 3, one of the types of interested persons that could appeal a decision is a person owning or occupying property in the immediate neighborhood of a property that is the subject of any decision or act taken under this chapter, who can demonstrate a particularized interest under the criteria reviewed, and who alleges that the decision or act, if confirmed, will not be in accord with the policies, purposes, or terms of the plan or bylaw of that community. So what currently exists in the statute is that anyone who lives nearby to a property that has been subject to a permit decision, who can demonstrate a physical or environmental impact under the criteria review, have the ability to then appeal. And this is limiting it, changing it to a particularized interest. So the particularized interest is the language that's used in Act 250 permits. It is a bit more specific. It has to be individual to that person. I don't know if there's additional adjectives you would want to add here.
Particularized interest defined in Act 250.
Somewhat.
There's a paragraph on it, isn't there?
It's the actual language in the court
It's
statute.
aggrieved. It's aggrieved.
It's part of the definition of aggrieved.
I thought that was very interesting and the committee should see it.
Okay,
Is there a problem that I like particularized, but I thought the aggrieved person is a standard that we've all had experience with and that there's a body of law on and all that.
So you're saying it would go an aggrieved,
You'd have to
line
have both.
13,
You'd
you
have
would
to
say
have
an
aggrieved,
aggrieved person
particularized, or an aggrieved person or something like
with,
that, and then
who can
define it.
demonstrate particularized interest.
so the only the only thing that's tricky is that this area of statute, section 4465 of Title 24 defines interested person, but section 4471 then uses that word interested person as someone who is aggrieved that can then appeal. And so the definition's in 2 different places. And so I think this covers it, but it could potentially need more work to make sure that they're aligned. But it's not as easy to look at it as it is for the Act 250
Right.
language. Yeah. But yeah.
I think probably, I mean, we'll have to hear the rest of our testimony, but I think we might ask for integration of the aggrieved into this.
Yeah, so the definition for Act 250 is similar. And I do think it covers it. So for person aggrieved for Act 250 purposes, it's a person who alleges an injury to a particularized interest protected by the provisions of law listed in this section.
It would be the same, yeah.
Yeah, and so I think that's pretty close because it's in particularized interest under the criteria reviewed.
Hmm.
But you could look at whether or not criteria reviewed is specific enough.
Sounds like a really circular.
I'll tell you.
Well, this-
I'll tell you what my concern is.
Yeah.
But let's
Right.
go to I don't want to dwell on this any longer. So
Sure.
let's move on. Yeah.
So then the next subdivision 4, is another provision that the chair and I had talked about previously, which is there's another type of interested person that's allowed under municipal permits. That's not under Act 2, that is not allowed under Act 250. And this is something the committee had looked at last year. So it is under subdivision 4, any 20 persons who may be any combination of voters, residents, or real property owners within the municipality can bring an appeal. So last year, the legislature changed this number from any 10 persons, you increased it to 20 persons. But this is an unusual type of standing because it's any 20 people within the town can join together to bring an appeal. So that is a different way at getting at limiting who can bring an appeal as opposed to using one of the other standards we were just previously talking about. So I don't know if you want to use all of these, but these are just some of the options.
Right. My thought is that what we would do is we would take all of those any person type stuff, which the administration proposal tried to get at by saying it has to be 20% of the adult population and they have to pay up to $50,000 if they lose and all that, and just get rid of all of it and say, use a traditional standing requirement that the person has to have. They have to be aggrieved and they have to have a particularized interest, which it seems to me in some ways is better. It's cleaner, it's using a standard, the standing standard of a aggrieved person. It's like case law, enormous amounts of case law. So somebody bringing a lawsuit who goes to a lawyer, the lawyer can tell them whether they'd be viewed as an aggrieved person. Okay.
Yep. All right. So the next, on page 21, an entirely different topic. So section 13 on page 21, this is about hearings on bylaw adoption. So this is a new provision added to Title 24, notwithstanding notwithstanding this section or any other law to the contrary. Bylaw amendments that are required to comply with amendments to this chapter. No hearings are required to be held on the bylaw amendments. And so this was addressing a concern by the chair about when you amend the statute in the legislature regarding what needs to be in the bylaws, the towns then need to go through the bylaw procedure and hold hearings on new bylaws before they can be adopted.
This, as I understand it, this proposal, which came from one of the, it came from one of the RPCs, and it was endorsed by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. It just applies to when state law orders a town to do something, that it can do it without hearing. It's limited to that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
You may consider being more specific. I said when there's an amendment to this chapter, and you could potentially make it a little more specific if you wanted to say regarding housing developments or if you wanted to be more specific than that, you could be.
Okay.
The next change is a small change. This is now section 14. So last year in Act 181, you directed the new land use review board, as the chair mentioned a few minutes ago, to come back with a report on how appeals of land use review board decisions should be made. The due date for that is currently January 15th, 2026. And on page 22, this is changing it to November 1, 2025. It's also adding a small provision down on line 21 into 22 saying that the board shall allow, asking them to look at whether to allow consolidation of appeals at the board or the court, and then including what resources the board would need if they were transferred to the board. And so just asking for a little more specificity,
Yeah.
if they would need resources to do that work.
In other words, if they decided to recommend that the land use review board be the housing court, well, what do they need? You know, they need lawyers, judges, doctors,
staff.
whatever.
Clerks. All right, I think just two more sections. So next, an entirely different topic, virtual group net metering. So I'm also the energy attorney. So at the bottom of page 23 into page 24, section 15 addresses a provision that was amended last year in Act 179. So in the renewable energy context, there's something called group net metering. You traditionally think of this as what the solar panels on your roof are. And this is where people are generating power and then They are credited for that power against what they're using. They are paid a different rate than the standard electric rate. It is higher than the standard electric rate. There's also this concept of group net metering where a bunch of people get together and own renewable energy development. And last year there was an amendment that was made that said you can no longer use group net metering if it is not being used adjacent to where it's being generated. So we call this virtual group net metering. It's usually where there's a solar field some distance away from the houses that are going to benefit from it, or it could be people all over the place are benefiting from it. Last year's law narrowed that to say that if you're going to do that, it has to be adjacent to where it is going to be used, sited closer to the load. So this is making a change. And so it's saying that if the system serves multifamily building consisting of qualified rental units serving low-income tenants, they shall be allowed to use group net metering. Previously in the statute, you will see, I think on the next page, there was an exemption, an exception provided for them that they had 1 year exception to this rule. So they had an additional year for affordable housing developers to add group net metering systems for affordable housing development. This would make it a permanent exception for them to always be able to use virtual group net metering.
I don't know if this will change your approach or not. In discussions with the HCB, it was suggested that it would be too controversial to completely lift the limit. It was a 1 year extension. And they said, make it 5. So think about whether if it's just 5 years. I mean, I feel like politically that's kind of their call. And if they prefer a 5 year rather than infinite extension, do you want to go back to the old way of doing it and just change the date? Or do you want to draft it this way? Okay.
So that's policy decision. If you.
No,
so if-
let's say we tell you the policy is 5 years.
Yeah.
Then the drafting issue.
I'll have to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
And so that language what I was just describing continues into page 26. And then the,
Sorry, you're good for now. Sorry.
okay.
Just for now, though.
Just for now.
I know, I'm trying to keep us on schedule.
Trying to,
Okay.
And that's a big topic. Group net metering is a big topic, yeah.
so this would, the whole, how far away the, change that.
Yeah, this wouldn't change any of that.
For affordable housing developers, they'd be allowed to use virtual group net metering, unlike other people.
Which is farther away from
Yes.
the site.
Yeah, what the testimony before us was that very often their sites are filled up with their multi-housing units.
Yeah.
And there's no adjacent property.
We're building where
Yeah, yeah.
there's already.
And they put solar on the roof, but they'd like to put more. And so this exception before was just 1 year. And they run out at the end of this year and you'd like it to extend.
Does anyone know the reasoning behind, exact reasonings behind the getting rid of doing that process?
Yes, so it is some of the most expensive energy that's generated. That was part of last year's Act 179. The utilities find that it's fairly expensive, the virtual group net metering projects.
What they didn't like is they didn't like it. Like, for example, my land is owned by 3 families. We have on our land, not by my house, but on our land, some solar. And my meter doesn't run backward, our bills run backward. That's not what they're worried about. They're worried about big projects, usually somewhere else, that everybody can just buy a part of, and call it group net metering and get the group net metering rate, which is high as far as the utilities are concerned. So they wanted to get rid of it, and the act did get rid of it.
There are
And
other
this would bring
mechanisms.
it back for,
Well, it got rid of it, but it created one little exception for affordable, low income housing.
For 1 year, so yes, this one.
1 year, and this would
Permanently.
extend that for another 5. Yeah.
So can I just ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So essentially what's happening is that the reason to do it is that we would be prioritizing clean energy for affordable housing.
Exactly.
So that people who pay for their heat and their AC and don't have a lot of funds can still benefit from,
from
but the energy
yeah.
companies say this is more expensive for us to give you than if we just, buy hydro?
Well, no, it's more expensive for us because the rate is set higher by the Public Utilities Commission. But I want to try not to get into it so we
Okay.
can get on. We
You're
can
right. it's a
discuss it
big-
further.
big issue.
Yeah.
Can I just ask one quick question?
Yeah,
Real quick. So does this impact
Thank you.
current net metering for single homeowners? Does this change anything for them?
No, it's
Just
it's
for.
prospective and
Prospective.
yes,
Okay,
and
so
it's
it doesn't
for
change
affordable
anything.
housing developers.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'll make sure there's no other shares.
In other words, whatever one might think of the policy involved in last year's change, this doesn't affect that. It's
Okay.
just simply, there was an exception for low-income housing and this extends it 5 years.
Okay.
Well, I think that's where we're gonna go if we do it, yeah.
Sorry, if you weren't finished, I didn't mean to interrupt. I
No.
thought you were, I'm just thinking like strategically, it sounds like if 5 years is what we can get, that would make more sense.
Well, that's what the
Bill?
UCB thought.
Oh,
And I think what they're feeling is, the utilities were strongly against net metering way off site. And that whole issue was kind of litigated ad nauseum last year. And they're worried about carving out an exception too long, too big. And so they said, if you make it 5 years, it will be more salient. We could make it,
I want to hear you.
okay, I'll tell you what, we will discuss the substance
yeah,
of
the
this, okay?
policy, yeah.
yeah.
Right.
So the last section I have is on page 26, and this is also on an entirely different topic. It's regarding the energy efficiency utilities. So this is language that's currently in S65 in the Senate. And so this is adding a requirement that the electric efficiency utilities dedicate 25% of their annual budget for residential services to customers with low to moderate income, and not less than 12.5% of the annual budget to small businesses and not-for-profit organizations. I don't know if that is exact, oh, and then, sorry, there's also additional language on page 27. The costs of providing services under this subsection shall be excluded from the calculation of cost effectiveness for the appointed entity's portfolio of services. And so the Efficiency Vermont and Burlington Electric Department provide efficiency services to electric customers in the state. Currently, they do provide efficiency services to both residential customers and commercial customers, as well as specifically lower income customers, including lower and moderate income customers. But the provision of those services costs more than other projects because they require higher incentive amounts. And so there have been discussions about whether or not their core mission of having cost effectiveness and least cost services has limited their ability to provide enough services to low and moderate income customers. So this is some language that addresses that. There are potentially other ways you could address that, but.
Two things, just for the committee. The context is that Efficiency Vermont, what they do, as you know, is they go into factories and change out their chillers, or what they do, all kinds of, they buy down the price of LED lights down to $1, in some times of the year. They do all kinds of things to create efficiency, what people call in the trade megawatts instead of megawatts. Okay, in other words, keeping demand down. They operate under a performance contract with the state. They have to provide certain savings and they get a certain amount of money for those savings. And if they are even more successful, et cetera, it's a performance-based contract. It's pretty unique, ingenious. The problem is the performance-based contract says you have to use least cost everywhere. And so what they've discovered is it's very hard for them to help affordable housing developments under the least cost theory. And so this carves out an exception to that and says that they have, it carves out an exception. Okay, the other thing I want to tell you is, unfortunately, I don't think this is going to make it. The reason is I just talked to Energy, though they may have time to hear the first change you talked about, the extension. They really can't handle this whole thing as a flyby. And I just don't know that we'll be able to do it, but you can leave it in for now, but it might go nowhere. Other questions of Ellen by members of the committee? 1,000 thank yous. I'll be in touch with you, okay?
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Good to
so
see you.
much. John, you're on. Wait. John Brooks. And then Jim's testified at 1:45, okay.
How do you want, I mean, I'm flexible, but I shoot up all the time.
Well, let's see, the adjourn. Without,
Yes.
don't look so smart.
I can look smart now.
Charlie is always telling me everything takes longer than you say it will. Okay, mea culpa, all right. What do you think? Should we have John come after the testimony and just extend our closing time past 3:00?
We are scheduled until 3 o'clock, so we would be coming after.
Yeah.
If that works for you.
I'm around, I can come back at 3:00, and keep you on the schedule, and, because I don't want to really rush through, I wanted to.
I think if members of the committee are willing, I'm sorry to keep you a little longer, but I think we need to do this. So why don't we, if it's all right with everybody, proceed with Jim and others. We're having two subjects here. Jim is going to be talking about the land bank. And then we have witnesses talking about the important issue of the rental registry and substitutes to it.
Yeah, I don't want to rush that either.
So we don't want to rush that. So let's hear these witnesses and then John,
I'll come back at 3.
come back at 3. Thank you.
Thank
Would
you.
you mind updating your page?
Give it a little refresh.
From GHC.
Okay, I see. All right. We have two witnesses about State Land Bank. Jim Tischler, who is with us electronically from Michigan. Welcome. And I know I think it's just as cold there as here. And Jamie Bauer. Hi, Jamie, who is from, she's from DH. So let's take it away. Jim, I'm gonna have, can you see and hear?
Yes, good afternoon. I can hear and see you all.
Okay, great. We're gonna introduce ourselves.
All right, Representative Emily Krasnow, Chittenden 9, South Burlington.
Hi, Saudia Lamont, Lamoille, Washington District, Morristown, Elmore, Worcester, Woodbury, small part of Stowe.
Hi, I am Elizabeth Burrows and I represent the Windsor 1 district.
I am Mary Howard and I represent Rutland City District 6.
Hi, Jack Myself, Chittenden 20, Colchester.
Debbie Dolgan and I represent St. Johnsbury, Kirby and Concord.
Hi, Tom Charlton. I represent Chester, Athens, Grafton, and Wyndham.
Joe Parsons, I represent the beautiful towns of Newbury, Topsom, and Groton.
Leonora Dodge, I represent Essex Town and the city of Essex Junction.
Ashley Bartley, Fairfax in Georgia.
Hi, and I'm Mark Mahaly and I represent Calais, Plainfield, and Marshfield. All of these places may be mysterious to you since you're in Michigan. But just by way of clarity for you and for Jamie, because we don't have a long time. Some of us, but not all of us, have read your report. The report, and we have a real interest in the housing end of things with what in Vermont are a substantial number of houses that are unoccupied or abandoned. And this was presented to us as one way of dealing with that issue. And so we're interested in how it would apply and any thoughts you have on what's involved, how it might be governed, how it might be funded. We probably, in the bill that's before us, if we deal with this, will be simply asking the Department of Housing and Community Development to follow up with a report that is an action report that actually would say exactly how do we do it and would give us legislative language to work with. Take it away. Give us your name for the record and tell us what you think.
Okay, you're looking for me to start?
Yes.
Is that, okay, okay, fine. Yes, well, good afternoon, honorable chair and committee members. My name is Jim Tischler. I presently am the development director for the State of Michigan Land Bank Authority, based in Lansing, Michigan. We operate statewide. But for the record, I'll also share that 15 years ago, I was the St. Albans city planner. And for 2 years in St. Albans, I helped prepare the growth center application and had a chance to get experienced and exposed to all things State House and otherwise in this great state of Vermont. So it's a pleasure to be chatting with you all. And it's my pleasure to be a part to help you solve some of your housing problems, particularly with land banking. Since I left Vermont, I was asked to come back by Governor Snyder here in Michigan and placed in a series of administrative leadership positions. The latest being about 8 years ago when I was asked by the governor then to come over to the State Land Bank and create a development operation, which I've been doing ever since. With me today, observing the goings on and proceedings in this committee is my boss, the Executive Director, Joseph Rivet. And I am prepared today to share with you, because, excuse me, some of the roles that a state level land bank can play, both itself and in support of local communities. Now, I am aware that you have a report that the administration has submitted to you for review. I was one of the parties that was interviewed for that report. And I think that the detail about how land banks can be involved directly in housing development is it has some toehold in that report. And I'm not going to get into the detail in my presentation about that, but if you have particular questions, I can give you examples of what we have been doing here in Michigan to support local land banks and communities in housing development, and particularly for mixed income, mixed use activities. But what I have is a presentation today. It's a few slides. Do you want me to go right from my computer, or do you have that presentation already up posted on your screen?
You'd have to go to your computer.
My
But
computer?
I am going to, yeah, I am now sending the committee again, although it's on the webpage, I am sending you the report. I'm going to do that, but you should go from your computer. We unfortunately we're a little pressed for time, just letting you
Sure.
know.
Sure thing. Okay, is that visible to y'all?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay. Maybe I can get there we go. Excuse me. This is a map which I pulled down from the internet from my good friends at the Center for Community Progress. Brian Larkin is the director of the National Land Bank Network. He's also a person that you probably want to have a conversation with. And this is perhaps not the immediate recent, but a recent map of all the land banks that are located across the United States. All of those states that are shown in blue are states that have passed enabling legislation to allow for land banks to be created. There are myriad of different formats and approaches to how to doing it. There are only 4 states right now that have enabled land banks starting at a state level, and then option, if opportune, for locals to create from a state base or with support from the state. And those states are my state, Michigan, Alabama, Massachusetts, and the latest one was Maine. You may be familiar with the work in Maine a couple years ago. In fact, we here in Michigan had assistance role in helping that legislation get started over there with the good crew, the good folks over in Maine. But what you see in this map is a real myriad of different approaches, different structures. In all the states, or most of the states, the structure of a land bank ranges from being a public sector entity to a quasi-public sector entity to being a nonprofit entity. There are just different approaches, different tasks, all driven to the same purposes that you saw in the report that that the DCHD prepared for you. Okay. And I'm going to hopefully advance my slide here. There we go. So the first thought you might think is, isn't land banking then a local activity? Meaning the work happens in a community, in a neighborhood, on a parcel within that community. And the quick answer is yes, but there are going to be other issues which rise beyond the capacity opportunity to capacity size of a local community or a local land bank. And those could be the need to conduct due diligence, environmental or land use or market assessment on properties, compounding issues with the site, whether they're title work or environmental issues of those sites, political issues, which could run a range, but it could be that there's not interest in that local community to actually do this work themselves. Ergo, there's potential need for somebody else to do it. And the number one issue that we have seen in our experience working with our network of approximately 60 county land banks across the state here is capacity. There is simply not enough budget, there's not enough personnel allocation, and not enough time to be able to service the activities that are so vital in order to move properties to productive reuse. And so in those scenarios, that's where the prospect or opportunity of a state-local relationship is in the offing. And it's multidimensional, two-way ways. It's not just one-way top-down or one-way bottom-up. It's a relationship that can, and in our case, we feel has been successfully demonstrated. If I were to suggest, if you were to ask me, what are the key categorical roles that a state level land bank could perform, you would see my response in this format. This is not in any ordinal format. This is just a roster list. So I'll start with the state being a state lands repository or agent or redeveloper, meaning that the state land bank, if you have one, can perform a role to put surplus or other unproductive state-owned facilities or properties to repurposing or reuse. Second would be the properties that would be in its own inventory. Here in my state, there are a small number of counties that do not do tax foreclosure. I should mention that counties are the foreclosing entities here in Michigan, not municipality, or not local cities or villages or towns. And that in those counties, the state itself does foreclosure process, and when those properties may go through foreclosure without being sold, auction without being sold, then they come to us as state land bank. Next would be providing direct tactical or tactical support to local land banks and governmental units that ask for our support, of which there's a sizable and growing amount of those units they're doing, largely because of the capacity issues. Next would be intake of properties to position for redevelopment. We refer to that as land banking, and on a growing basis, we are actually intaking properties and holding them largely for residential or housing and largely for affordable, attainable, or mixed income housing projects to help set them up task, procedure, and incentive-wise for development. And finally, developing the guardrails, the process, the tools, the standards to systemize land banking across the network of local practitioners in the counties across my state. Couple of examples for you. These are images of a former Department of Corrections facility in Michigan. There are 20 closed facilities in the state. Gradually, the legislature and administration is surplusing those properties and moving them over to us, and we are the lead with the local unit of government to engage a planning and development and repurposing and redevelopment incenting project to move them into productive use. This site, which is near Traverse City, it's in the Northwest Lower Peninsula, was repurposed into a small scale, a small entrepreneurial manufacturing hub. Which is alive and active and has produced approximately 700 jobs to date. We got this site in 2019. We had to survive the early years of the the pandemic. And in 2021, we executed agreement with the developer, and this project is what you do not see the fences and the barbed wire. The buildings are still there. They're being repurposed, as I said, for light scale manufacturing. In economic development, we are the title holder to a number of sites, either by the state's Economic Development Corporation or by local economic development entities to position them for current or future development for economic jobs and creation activities here in the state. This image that I'm showing you here is one of the so-called mega sites, mega industrial sites. If you have heard of Blue Oval, That is the Ford Motor Company's battery development site, which is near Marshall, Michigan, you see on the upper left there. It's a very large property, which is still a large measure of farmland, and we are the title holders holding it for a future point in time, undetermined at this point, where it may become ready to go for a next investment for battery or for other large-scale manufacturing activity. We also are the owners of what I like to say the biggest, baddest brownfields in the state. The 27 largest sites and or most contaminated properties that nobody wants to own. We take title to them as the repository of last resort. We can do this because land banks under CERCLA, the Superfund law, have specific exemption on liability. It's under section 101 sub 20 in the CERCLA law. Because we are an interim user or ongoing interim user, and we are serving the public's interests. And so in that scenario, we are taking many of these sites. 2 of them are shown here for you. But what we're finding it's happened in the past 2 to 3 years is that these types of large sites, which usually don't have any other use in or at the grade, are becoming the primary locations of interest for solar array developers. And so we're seeing reuse of these properties starting to grow for that purpose. We also have an agreement between our environmental agency, the Department of Environmental, Great Lakes and Energy, and the US EPA, where sites that actually go through enforcement actions, whoever and however they do, will come to us as the final title holder, again, as a repository. And this has provided an excellent service for both the state and for the federal governments, not just EPA, but other federal agencies as well. You see an example in these images of a site which was subject to an enforcement action in the Detroit suburbs, where the EPA got involved, engaged enforcement, had to take jurisdictional title of the property from the owner because of their criminal activity, for lack of a better phrase. And after the enforcement action was completed, we are in line to become the title holder. The enforcement and the cleanup work is ongoing still right now at this point. And that's been done through agreement, and that's a role that we can play with land banks. Now, in local communities and neighborhoods, our inventory is approximately 2,600 parcels across the entire state of Michigan. We have a number of concentrations. Some of them are in Southeast Michigan, some are in West Michigan near Grand Rapids. And in those scenarios, we have taken title to properties that were for which federal funds were used in the past couple decades through various federal programs for acquisition, demolition. And in those scenarios, we are putting those up for available for either use, neighborhood use, be it side lots or gardens, but more and more of those are becoming housing development projects in and of themselves.
Tim, we do have to move on pretty quickly, so.
Yep, last slide here for you is that the final role we play is that we are a land holder. We can do it temporarily. We take in properties by local units and hold them, or land banks and hold them for setting them up for repurposing. And City of Grand Rapids is a great example where we were their land title holder for many of their lots, which actually caused them to amend the statute last year to create their own land bank, and now they own those lots. We transfer back to them. That's it. That's my presentation of the major roles that a land bank can play at a state level.
Questions from the committee? Yes, Lenora.
Thank you, Chair. I'm trying to figure out, Jim, how the math is mathing,
As the kids are saying these days.
So, we often hear about how costly it is to remediate, and here you guys are taking this on and creating something, which seemed pretty cool, but I'm just wondering how, I love the projects that you described, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about how it's done.
Yeah. Well, what you didn't see in the presentation today, and I haven't brought it up, is the funding side of this. How do these projects actually get funded? In my state, we have a direct connection between land banks and land bank control properties and what we would call project-based tax increment financing. Land bank properties or land bank control properties are directly eligible, and they can take the value from future, or the taxes from future value on redevelopment and use that to cover eligible costs, both in site prep, assessment, cleanup, infrastructure, a wide range of activities to help make that project go. And by and large, outside of grant supports from, or grant supports from other levels of government, that is the mainline mechanism for how land bank properties get redeveloped and repurposed here in Michigan. Your report, or the report issued to you by the administration, specifically identifies that funding is an issue that needs to be discussed. I didn't talk about it today. I gave you one example here, but I would, as you continue your conversation, I would agree with the administration that this is a very important item to marry up, connect to your land bank program if you proceed to go, because that will actually generate your revenue to cover and repurpose these properties, as I showed.
We have, our next witness is Jamie Bauer, is the author of the report. She may have something to say about that. Yes.
Thank you very much for having me.
Oops. Jamie, just a second. Did you have a question of this witness?
I do. Thank you. Jim, when you started this program, what other states' models did you use, or were you the first?
In Michigan was one of the first there were states that authorized land banking, such as, and municipalities. Cleveland, Ohio, and St. Louis were two that kind of struck out on their own and got going back almost 35 years ago. But in terms of state enablement legislation, Michigan was the first in 2003 to get that round of work going with its statute. Ohio followed, a number of states then followed after that. So we're one of the early state level structures.
And anybody who knows me well knows that I often use the phrase practice waffle, which means it can be messy, but it comes out delicious anyway.
First waffle.
Yeah, the practice waffle. And so I wonder, during your practice waffle days, what were the biggest initial problems that you had to address that scared you?
Figuring out how to bring the varied interests or parties that had authority or power together to systemize an operation to move these properties to productive reuse. There is a fair amount of authority and power that's distributed across various levels of government and various institutions within those levels of government to do different things. But when you're dealing with repurposing and redeveloping property, you are working at cross-discipline, cross-sector, cross-activity. And so to the extent that you can find a mechanism to get all those players on a platform to actually harmonize and systemize an approach, that's the key in Jim Tischler's opinion. Land banking combined with the investment and incentive tools was the ticket here in this state. And I believe that's actually that's been replicated across most of the state programs that we see today.
Well, congratulations on making it past your practice waffle.
Thank you. Jamie, we have about, I would say, 9 minutes for you and any comments by Sean.
Sure, I will be very brief. First, thank you for having me. To conduct the study, we spoke with over 50 stakeholders across the state, land banks across the nation, and best practices. We're very proud of the study. Jim explained a lot of the nuts and bolts of the land bank. So I would like to really focus on what I heard from Vermonters. Vermont has some real challenges in rural areas. We've got communities with like 1,000 people that don't have capacity to redevelop that house or the church or farmland that's abandoned. A land bank could step in and help with project management, development help, financing assistance. They can help hold property for environmental conservation and reclamation. They can help stabilize properties after a disaster like a flood. One of the things we would like to explore is with Barre, Vermont, there are properties that have been turned down for the buyout because Barre does not want to lose them permanently to their grand list. I think a land bank could help with situations like that. Our private and nonprofit developers identified real barriers for larger developments when you're trying to stack funding with federal funding and private funding. You've got requirements for HUD that are in opposition to a lender. A land bank can step in, hold property and help put all of this together. In the report, there are numerous projects that didn't happen or were much more expensive, outlined, that would have been assisted with a land bank. One of the issues for identified for vacant and abandoned properties in Vermont is the 1-year redemption period for tax foreclosures. That's something that we would like to take a look at and see what we could do to help make redevelopment of vacant properties easier and faster. We are recommending just one statewide land bank. For example, I come from Cleveland, Ohio, and the Cuyahoga County Land Bank, also a best practice, serves 1.6 million people. So we believe that just one land bank to serve 650,000 people would work. Another thing with land banks is they are community driven. Communities go to land banks and say, hey, I need help with. Land banks don't go to communities and say, this is what we're going to do. So we think that approach will work well. We were well received by all the partners. And the next steps would be doing, if we wanted to move forward, a study committee to really put together all the nuts and bolts. So I don't know if I'm trying to be fast, so.
Oh, no, that's great. That's exactly what we needed to hear. Let me ask you, and I guess Sean Gilpin, are you still on?
I am.
Well, I guess I'm asking both of you. Sean, will you introduce yourself for the record?
Certainly. Hello, everyone. My name's Sean Gilpin. I'm the director of the Housing Division, and am very grateful for working with Jamie, who did, I think, a great job on this report, and actually hails from Cleveland, Ohio, where as Jim mentioned, one of the first land banks were created.
Well, and Ohioan can't be all bad since I'm from Cincinnati. Anyway, both of you, are you comfortable, just to get to the bottom line, with our including in our bill direction to HCD to produce an action plan and proposed language for us by November of next year, so that we can maybe do something in the legislative session of 26?
I will cut to the quick. We're very excited about this this initiative, this thought. This is a legislative report that was requested last year. It is not reflected in the governor's budget. And I think as Jim had mentioned, a lot of this cross-sector development and structuring is it's complicated. And so I think very interested in working on it. We have some ideas about how we might reach out to some of our institutions of higher education around the state to see if there might be some folks that we can help us with the endeavor. Coming up with legislative language for the next session, for the remainder of this biennium, it will be a tough climb, no doubt. I think we're eager to do it. We'd like to come to yes, but I want to be candid about where our resources are and how stretched they are. So happy to have that discussion. I just want to be very upfront about what it is you folks are looking for and making sure that we're successful in being able to deliver that.
Thank you so much. If it's okay with the committee, I'd like to move on to the issue of the representatives who are going to testify from the Department of Taxes on the issue of the registry or an alternative to it. And so thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate Jim and Jamie and Sean for your testimony, and sorry to rush a little.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Well, just so you know, they're scheduled for 2:30. You had asked for Jim to have 40 minutes.
I see Rebecca, Jake, and Jill.
Correct. They're following this testimony.
This testimony.
It's just about the same bill, so it's under the same heading.
So Rebecca, Jake, and Jill are not due until when?
2:30.
2:30, and are not here.
Correct.
So we can ask all our questions.
We can ask questions.
All the land bank questions.
So first of all, I would suggest several things. One is that you text or email them and see if any of them is available earlier. And second of all, Sean is still here. He hasn't gone away.
I am, and I can, I'm railing Jamie back in.
Yeah. So are there questions people have about the land bank? I have one, but I mean, are other questions? Sean, if you go ahead. Yeah, please.
Oh, this is new to me, this idea. I'm just curious, if there's going to be some overlap of what current processes we're already doing for land and certain things. I mean, there's going to be some area of overlap, I would imagine, from that, but I'm just not sure where that would be. Do you have any ideas on that?
Sure. So, and I see Jamie's joined us again as well, and she might have some thoughts on this as she spoke with a number of different regional planning commissions and regional development commissions. Jamie, the question was about what sort of overlap exists right now for what is happening with our existing organizations that that a land bank might be able to say step into or be accessory to.
So one is the varying degrees of capacity for both the regional development commissions and the planning and communities themselves. We have communities like St. Johnsbury that's purchasing property and acting as a land bank, but that means that that's money they can't spend on their roads or their schools or other things. Everyone I spoke to was really excited about having a central entity that can be a wealth for resources, for grant writing, for property development, for project management. Because right now it's really hard to navigate in our landscape with everybody having different rules, different capacity, different funding. A land bank would really streamline development throughout the state. Does that answer it?
I guess so. I mean, probably there's a little bit of work all over the place. Like our RPCs probably do a little work that would fall in the same bucket. There's okay.
Yeah, I would definitely say there is some overlap. I don't think there's any, as Jamie just mentioned, there's no sort of centralized organizer of a lot of these efforts. So I think that could be huge. Another huge thing for the land bank is really we rely so much on different funding sources, particularly for subsidized affordable housing development, but really with any development, as Jim sort of alluded to, it's not necessarily just housing. A land bank can do things with economic development and other brownfield remediation, in conjunction with our existing brownfield programs. But one of the major challenges and a big driver of cost is the timing. And if you're dealing with several different federal funds, you're dealing with some state funds, trying to line all that up so that the timing works out. And one fund might say you're not allowed to buy the property until you've collected enough money from the other grants. And there are a lot of things that can make it complicated, especially with our existing land market and housing market. So having a land bank would be a way to kind of slow things down a little bit in the sense that they can take over control of a parcel so that it's not being sniped by speculative developers. They can then work with an organization that's constructing their capital stack so they can actually pursue a project. So it opens up a lot of opportunities so that people are making more strategic decisions about development as opposed to jumping at an opportunity or giving up an opportunity for lack of the planning time.
I have an example of a real life project that did not happen because we didn't have a land bank or an entity like a land bank. Zach Hale had shared with me, he wanted to do the redevelopment of a hotel, the Auburn Inn. Something just shook. Oh, sorry. And the seller, it would have created 50 housing units.
In Bennington.
In Bennington. And the seller got impatient, sold it to a buyer who then wanted to sell it to Zach for more money than he paid for it. And the whole deal that was almost all financed and almost all ready to go completely fell apart. A land bank could have grabbed that property, held it, and we would have 50 more affordable housing units in Bennington today.
So one of the functions of a land bank, what you're saying is kind of the ability to move in quickly and acquire property, which is a function that land trusts often have with land that's to be conserved. You know, very often land trusts come in, acquire property quickly because they can, they have the resources. Even if they don't want to be the one that eventually holds it, they want to spin it off, but they can hold on to it until the funding is set up.
That's right.
If one of the interests, as I mentioned, that we have is abandoned or distressed properties, of which there are quite a few in Vermont. Will land bank be able to do an inventory?
Sure. I mean, with the right funding and the right staffing.
Yeah. And then how would, just theoretically, how would that work? Let's say there's on Route 15, a house that's falling apart that is nobody's paying taxes on. What would a land bank do?
Well, I can tell you how it worked for me in Cleveland with the Cuyahoga County Land Bank. I helped redevelop over 65 abandoned homes in a neighborhood that became owner-occupied affordable homes. I would go to the land bank and say, hey, here's a property over here that is abandoned, vacant, tax delinquent. They would work with the county treasurer and fast track the tax foreclosure, get it in our hands, sell it to me for $3,000, and I could get it rehabbed and sold to someone for between $100,000 and $120,000. So
I would add it also, just in addition to that, it takes away, I think, from what I've heard, and we haven't done a census on this, but there are a number of municipalities who deal with the issue of abandoned properties and find themselves at an impasse because they want something to happen, but don't necessarily want the liability of the town taking over the ownership of said property because they don't have the resources to manage a project. So a land bank would be a resource for an under-resourced town to say, can you be the steward of said property if we do take it to tax sale and make sure that it turns into something beneficial.
I have a question about that. Okay, so instead of a tax sale, is that what you're saying? Or after or as the tax sale?
Right.
So I'm looking up at Jamie said that there was a 1-year redemption period for tax foreclosures. Can you please explain what you mean by that?
yes, when I talk to the tax department, they're currently for most communities, they do a tax sale. There is a 1-year redemption, which means for 1 year, the person who had owned the property get the property back.
Right. Yeah, that's part of the tax sale.
So, yep, absolutely. And they had revealed that some recent time ago that the Vermont Legal Aid wanted to do some reforms that included lengthening the redemption period to help homeowners not lose their home. And I think it would be a really great opportunity to look at how we could to come to the table with the Vermont Legal Aid and how can we help it make harder to take homes away from people, but make it easier to redevelop vacant properties by doing some code revisions in the future.
Do you think that a property one of my feelings is, at least in my district, is that if a property is an abandoned property that is purchased through a tax sale, of course, we have an abandoned property that we purchased through tax sale, but if there was a way to create a scenario to make it easier for people to make it easier to go into the bank, my feeling is that it should not then remain fallow. That it should have a period of time. If you're going to buy an abandoned property in particular from a land bank or through a tax sale, that you should have and this is just my feeling, you should have a particular time during which it has to be made useful again?
Yeah, I mean, I think different land banks do things differently. In my experience, for example, there was a dry cleaner that had been vacant and abandoned for over 30 years. We went to the land bank with a buyer who wanted to open a business there. They helped us apply for funding for phase 1 and phase 2 assessment, helped us with the EPA with the remediation, sold it to the seller with a lot of agreements for $3,000, and that owner put $800,000 into that building and has a really nice business. So yeah, there are some land banks that will hold more properties, and there are some land banks that will want to have a plan before you purchase a property. And and sometimes it's a combination.
I guess what I want to know is, so the land bank's role in that chain of events is to act as a protective holder while you get your act together.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or sometimes as a developer, I mean.
Or
they can't
sometimes as a developer,
But
yeah.
very often somebody else does.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate.
Do you guys have any ideas? I heard something about Maine having an income from tipping fees, although it's hard for me to imagine that that amounts to very much. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on income?
There's a few different funding, few different ways that land banks are funded. For Maine, they do a $3 per fund fee on construction and demolition waste. And I think Tuck said they get about 1.6 million a year from that for their operating, and then they can subsidize that with fees for services, selling properties, and the like. In Ohio, there's they get a small portion of the late fines on delinquent property taxes. In Georgia, they did a $14 million blight bond to fund their work. So there's different models and different ways of funding it that would need to be sorted out as part of a study committee to move forward.
Well, thank you. I see that our next witnesses or some walked in the door, so we're going to move on. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Mhm.
You guys are
Jake and Rebecca.
Rebecca. All right,
Tax department.
would you like to testify together, in which case pull up a chair next to that?
I can grab that little bit.
Someone's sitting there. Valuable.
Thank you for coming over. Appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah. You know what we're gonna do? Well, here, while we're waiting for the chair, why doesn't the committee introduce itself to you?
Great. Ashley Bartley, I represent Authority of Georgia.
Eileen R. Dodge from Essex Town and City of Essex Junction.
Joe Parsons, Newberry Topsom, and Farrar.
Tom Charlton, Chester, Athens, Grafton.
Debbie Dolphin from St. Johnsbury, Concord, and Kirby.
Gail Bezel, Chittenden 20, Colchester.
Mary Howard, Rutland City District 6.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Burrows. I represent Windsor 1, which is Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
Saudi Law, Memorial Washington District, more south, more Worcester, Woodbury, small person.
Hi, welcome. I'm Mark Mahaly, and I represent Callis in Plainfield and Marshfield. Have a seat.
Also. Great to meet you. I'll take
Well, for the record, I'm Rebecca Samroff. I'm the Deputy Commissioner at the Tax Department. It's always fun to get to know a new committee, so thanks so much for having us in.
Okay, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Jake Feldman, Senior Fiscal Analyst at the Tax Department.
Right. We have listed Jill Remick, who I think is before another committee now. So we'll start with you. I want to just set the stage, and please, members of the committee, help me on this. We have heard various, we have a proposal in front of us, which actually comes from a proposal last year to have a rental registry. And there are, I'm not in a position to say all the motivations that were behind the rental registry idea, but feeling that for health and safety reasons, flooding, for example, but also for planning and thinking about housing. It was something that knowing where our renters were and a little information about them, what they paid, et cetera, who our landlords were, made sense for us. The rental registry was very controversial and didn't go anywhere. We're looking at alternatives which might be more acceptable and less duplicative than the rental registry, which is something that's desirable, but has its, as I said, its political issues. Is that an accurate? And that's why what happened is, because that we have actually people who are very familiar with being a landlord on the committee and others who pointed to us that already landlords filed with the Department of Taxes and provided a lot of information. So the question, of course, before us is that information equivalent to more than the rental registry? Is it something that could be a substitute for the rental registry? Are there ways of, if there's privacy issues, how might they be addressed, et cetera? And so it's a rather vital issue. And so we decide to hear from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And would other members of the committee like to supplement or correct my description?
No?
I think that's pretty spot on.
Okay, so
Well, hopefully our presentation will help with some of these questions. And we have this PowerPoint behind me, and there's a document under Rebecca's name on the committee page. And it looks like you guys also have some paper coming around. So 3 ways to learn about our angle on this.
Thank you.
So what we're responding to is the draft that we saw, 25-838, section 5, talks about basically landlord certificate data, and then section 6 is a little bit about this potential.
We haven't updated it since at least this language, so you'd be speaking on that portion as well.
Oh, fantastic. So I think it's gonna be relevant, and you know, tax department doesn't come in here so much. So it's great to be here, great to talk to a new committee. And we should say, I wrote it on the bottom here, but you know, our mission is to serve Vermonters by administering our tax law fairly and efficiently to help taxpayers understand and comply with their state tax obligations. We take it pretty seriously, our mission. We have a super high job satisfaction of the tax department, best in state government. And, you know, I think we're all laser focused on what we need to do to administer the tax system, which includes the credit system, renter credit and property tax credits. That's part of what we do. So everything we do is towards those goals and collecting information that we need for those things. A little bit of background, we did a pretty major reform of it used to be called renter rebate. We changed the name to renter credit. And that happened, it took years of work to do, but it was passed in 2021. It was not something that we made up on our own. It was based on what housing advocates were asking for and what members of the legislature were asking for. We achieved some pretty massive policy improvements and goals that stakeholders have been asking for. We significantly reduced the paperwork for renters and landlords both. And we corrected some egregious confidentiality issues with the buyer renter rebate program. For example, as a younger fellow, I was living here in Montpelier with my wonderful roommate, Asa. And I filed taxes, I filed for a renter rebate. But to do that, I had to ask Asa for his social security number and all these elements of his income. It was based on our combined income in the unit. And then who did the tax department send the credit to? To me. So if Asa wanted any of that, you have to come talk to me and we have to figure out a way. But we fixed that. We fixed that in this reform, and we fixed dozens of other things. And we made it so if you look at renter rebate in the old system, 25% of the claims were issued within 60 days. These days, this year, 96% of renter credit claims are issued within 60 days. So this is massive policy improvement. But driving all of this is our forms and the efficiency of our forms and what we're doing on the back end. The purpose of the landlord certificate is to collect the data that is needed for the back end verification of renter credit claims. The 2021 reform made the landlord certificate way easier, but still tax denies too many credits each year because there's no certificate on file. This is a problem. We would like to make that problem go away even more. We want everyone who's entitled to a credit, all the low-income renters, to be able to get it. We want to close that gap. Adding unnecessary and problematic survey fields to the form, as prescribed by Act 181 of 2024, would make the problem worse. It would make more work for the department and put the credits of low-income renters at risk. To be clear about what I'm saying here is there was legislation passed last year that tacked a bunch of stuff onto the landlord certificate that is not needed for the renter credit. The purpose of the fields they added was surveying. So when you make the landlord certificate harder and harder to fill out, what's going to happen? Fewer and fewer landlords are going to want to do it. And some of the things that they were asking for are a little bit sensitive, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So the landlord certificate is really, in our eyes, just to make sure that the renter credit claims that we're processing, we can do a little bit of verification to get what we need to make sure that they get their money quickly. We don't see it as a way to collect information about the state's rental units. And if it's leveraged that way, that opens up all kinds of problems.
And sorry, Jake, I'll just jump in to add a little context to what happens when we do get a renter credit claim and there's no landlord certificate. And then also, yeah, I'll start there. So the system is like working really seamlessly, as Jake said. Now, since the reform, it's like a real success story. You know, Jake mentioned our mission, which, you know, as department leadership makes me glow inside. It's really, we have a really mission focused organization. We have department core values, the first one, which is service. We also have department goals, the first of which is being a model of service-oriented tax administration. So like administration of credits for low-income Vermonters is like really just like super key. We like, you know, hold up success stories like this all the time. So that's, you know, why Jake and other colleagues in, you know, frontline staff who are, you know, on the front lines of administering these credits and dealing with renters issues and filing have like really strong feelings about kind of taking a step backwards and adding a bunch of fields to this form once we've had such success in streamlining. But, you know, if there was still a thorn in the side of this program, it would be landlord certificate compliance, which has improved dramatically. But basically, like what happens now, if you file a renter credit claim, we have a landlord certificate on file, goes through without a hitch. If there's not a landlord certificate on file, it causes a lot of work for staff. First of all, we like comb through our little warehouse, seeing if maybe it was like incorrect span number, misspelling, you know, flipping the first and last names of the landlord. Like staff are really intent on trying to find that landlord certificate, make the connection to send them out the door. But more often than not, we don't have a match. It's not that simple. So we reach out to the renter for more information, you know, who like, first of all, encouraging them, like, you know, talk to your landlord, get them, ask them if they file the landlord certificate so we can process your renter claim. Also, what's their name? Like, what's their contact information? Can we reach out to the landlord if we're able to get that follow-up from the renter? But, you know, for reasons that I'm sure, you know, we can all imagine, this credit targets like the lowest income Vermonters. We don't get like a high response rate to these follow-ups for more information. You know, like it could be they don't receive them. It could be it's like intimidating. It's like on the list of 1,000 things they have to do as a low-income Vermonter making it work in the state. So unfortunately, even though staff really do try to like do that follow-up to get the landlord information necessary to send up these credits, it's often met without a response. So that's why compliance on the front end is really crucial. So.
Thanks, Chair. I thought that, like recently, I know that the landlords are just saying that here's to the renters are just writing a letter that says, here's your span number, which is for getting the renter's credit. I don't know whether that's only in affordable housing, you know, in large affordable housing units or only for senior housing or whatnot, but they're like, we are no longer giving you the letter, blah, blah.
Yeah, no,
Correct.
Are you describing something different than
Yeah,
that?
landlords give their certificates directly to the department.
So
there's
it's
no-
just an exchange
Yeah.
with you, directly with the landlord.
And cool if they're giving their renters their span, that's definitely helpful, but we do have a portal online where both renters and landlords can just pop in their address and it gives the span. And that's linked on the form.
The span is the magic that connects it behind the scenes. It used to be in the old renter rebate that a renter had to go to his or her landlord and ask for a bunch of information, which was problematic. You can imagine if a renter and the landlord didn't have a good relationship, then maybe there is some hesitancy there. We got rid of that. So it's happening on the back end. Landlords are giving us for each property that they own, you know, the information that we need. And landlords are saying, renters are saying, here's the span of my property and here's my claim, and we connect it. But there are cases where the renter may ask their landlord for a span if they didn't find it on our search tool that we created. But the landlord is still on the back end providing the tax department the data it needs.
Elizabeth?
Forgive me, but as I'm taking notes on what you're saying, I'm really getting hung up on the word span because I don't know what it is.
It's a unique identifier called, stands for School Property Account Number. It was created in Act 60. It's a unique identifier for every property in the state. If you look at your tax bill, when you go home, you'll see it if you own property, you'll see it on there.
And thank you for that question. We get into like acronym mode too easily, tax and probably state government in general.
For, I just.
Say it again, school property
Account number.
account number.
Could you tell us or summarize for us what information is included in this filing? And what additional information Act 181 requires that you don't like? Well, requires, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I think the next couple slides are gonna
Okay.
kind of get into that. Yeah.
Okay.
There's differences between what the landlord certificate is collecting and what a rental registry presumably would be looking for. The landlord certificate has, and I have a link down towards the bottom if you want to take a look at it, but it has a top section which is about the property. And then it has a line for each renter. It's asking about each renter because each renter is a potential claimant. It's a taxpayer and a claimant. So we need to know about people. We're not concerned about units. We just need to know about the people. So that's the data that we're collecting on the landlord certificate.
So if you have a couple in an apartment, there'll be they'll show two renters?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. The rental registry would probably be not interested in people. It would probably be interested in the unit. And aspects of the unit. What rent do you charge for the unit on a monthly basis? Is it ADA accessible, stuff like that. It's interested in unit-based information. The landlord certificate is only about long-term rentals. Because those are the only ones who can claim a credit. People who come here and stay in an Airbnb can't claim a renter credit, right?
Or a short-term rental, any short-term rental, right?
Right, any short-term rental, yeah, just Airbnb is a popular one, but the rental registry, we think, and based on reading section 6, it's probably interested in data on long-term and short-term rentals. The landlord certificate is about something that happened in the prior year. Like landlords file them, they're supposed to file them by January 30th after the tax year, so another month after. and then it takes us a while to get them all and clean them. We think the rental registry might be prospective, like, because it's a registry, registering that maybe it's like, I register my kid for camp, it's something that's happening in the future. So we think it's probably about the coming year. So different years. And the landlord certificate doesn't collect rent amounts. In the reform that we did, it's based on HUD fair market rents. It's not based on the rent you actually paid, except for subsidized renters. It is based on the rent that they paid after their subsidy. That's only about 10% of all renters. We think that the rental registry would probably want to know about the monthly rent for a unit. Like, how much do you charge for your 2-bedroom in Essex or whatever? We think that's probably what it's concerned with, but we're not collecting that information. So looking at what's asked for in the draft legislation, we can provide some of it. And we have been providing a lot of the stuff for years. But some of the things that were added last year are going to be tough for the reasons, or beyond tough for the reasons that I just mentioned. So we are happy to provide the name of the owner or landlord. We can do that. We have been doing that for a long, long time. Keep on doing that. We can, and whether this is for a rental registry or whatever, whoever wants this data, we're happy to do it, and we've been doing it for a long time. Phone number, email, and mailing address of the landlord, no problem. We have that. Location of the unit. We don't have locations of specific units. We're not collecting information on units, but we do have at the top of that form, the location of the property. This is kind of a different thing. Like, you can have like a rental property that maybe is like crosses a street and only has one span. So we're happy to provide the location of the rental property.
You do know, though, or one could accumulate the number of people that are located, the number of renters that are located in that rental property, correct? Because you are interested in you're interested in the renter, not the unit. But you would know, for example, if a landlord owns a multiplex and they have one address, but you see 6 different people under that address, can anyone using your data match people to that address?
Well, one person could have rented 6 months and another person could have rented the same unit for 6 months. So that would look like 2 people. So I'm not sure.
In your data collection, isn't your data? Oh, so someone files by 1:30, they have to say the name of everybody, the number, they have to file a separate line for everyone who lived in the building during the prior year.
That's right.
Okay, all right.
Yep. So year built, we don't have that now. We potentially could get it through CAMA data, which Jill might be talking about. It stands for Computer Assisted Mass Appraisal. We could add it to the top of the form for the property. That's okay. Like, we can put that up for the property, but asking for the year built of each unit is problematic. Like, if somebody did an addition in 1985, and so some units are 1960 and some are 1985 and some are 1993, we're not collecting data by unit. So we can't get at that, but we could ask about when was the property built. You know, that's reasonable. Type of rental unit. We're not collecting data by unit, but we can, and we have been asking landlords what types are in the building. Like, is it condominiums or like, there's different kinds of potential things there. So we can keep doing that, but we're not tracking it by unit. Number of units in the building, no problem. We already asked that. School property count number, no problem at all. Accessibility of the unit. We don't collect data by unit. So this is another thing that's added where we can't get it because we're not asking about individual units, we're asking about people. We could ask for and then provide how many units are ADA accessible. We could ask landlords that. We're not sure if a definition really exists for that, but we could try to help out there. There's a last one in the draft language that says any other information the department, which is DHCD, deems appropriate. We think this might be talking about rent amounts, and that's maybe the most problematic of all things. There's confidentiality and other issues around collecting and disclosing rental income. Like a lot of you are landlords, or some of you are landlords. Potentially this would be, like Representative Charlton had, it would say that he collected $36,000 in rent. So there's some major confidentiality issues there, and that one is problematic. It's also problematic because landlords might look at it and think, oh, I'm handing the tax department this information. Are they going to audit me on my income tax returns if I'm showing them this?
And I'll just pause you there, Jake, because that's like a big concern that's been coming from our taxpayer services division. Like part of the compliance challenges with landlord certificates of the past that we really feel like we cleaned up by, removing all the unnecessary fields. It's just like hesitancy to fill it out because not because they're like bad actors, but like, oh, like, have I checked? Like, am I like, in breach of some occupancy laws I'm not aware of, and I'm handing over this information to the state? Like what if I mess up reporting my rental income? Is the tax department now going to have this information on how much rent I have and use it to go audit me on my income? And like, we want to make it crystal clear that like this program is about giving a very generous credit to very low income Vermonters. The information we need to verify that credit because it's generous. We're also, integrity is our second core value, and we take that very seriously. Our state funds, making sure they're going out appropriately. So we definitely don't want any confusion on the landlord side of like, what will happen to me down the road if I give the tax department this information about the money I'm collecting here?
And it's not necessary for the credit program, right? So if they rate 000 for rent, like the tax department's not going to go chase them down because we don't need that information. The only ones we really need it for are the subsidized population because of the way the program is set up. And we want to make sure we get that so we get them the right credit. And if a landlord just goes 00000 and they write that in for subsidized renter, they're going to get a credit of 0.
I am confused there. How does the credit work if I'm not subsidized?
It's based on HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development's fair market rent.
Fair market, you just assume fair market rent. The credit's based on fair market rent, but if I'm less than that because I'm subsidized, then the credit's based on
what you actually paid.
Pay rent.
Yeah, so if you're 75% subsidized, it would, look at just the 25% of that you did pay and base it on that. But it's HUD fair market rent. It's based on family size and it's based on the county you live in.
So, actually, my question, I guess, next question is, you said you provided, let's say we said, great, with the modifications that you're talking about, that's enough. Let's say we said that. How could you make that information available and to whom?
Well, Act 181 right now has a requirement that we publish a report annually to the legislature on aggregated data on the new field or the fields that exist now and the new fields that were added under Act 181. As Jake mentioned, some of these fields are pretty problematic for us, and we look forward to working with BHFA to try to find a way forward before we're tasked with implementing this for the next tax year.
And what about the disaggregated data?
Go ahead. I have some information here.
I think our reporting requirements may have changed a little bit, but traditionally we've provided it to BHFA every year. They have always looked for it. And I'm not sure of other groups who have looked for it, but
right.
I know there are some.
There was some disaggregated publicly available data that was repealed and will be repealed as of July 1st of this year and replaced with kind of this new annual legislative reporting that was under Act 181. that's great. We don't love reporting tax data publicly at a granular level.
We'll get to the problematic nature of it.
I'm sorry.
If someone said, just give me the raw data by application, by person, and then I'll aggregate it and manipulate it any way I want, could you do that?
Well, so that's allowed right now until July 1st, for anyone to do. We also have authorized sharing, that's existed in the law, to DHCD and DHSA, but whatever organization DHCD deems to carry out the state housing needs assessment. So we give that information to them. We also give it to DPS, Division of Vermont Emergency Management, for the reasons that you were speaking of before, in case that's useful to them and emergency management purposes. When we share information like this, it comes with the same confidentiality provisions that our staff operates under. So unless I mentioned the granular data that was allowed through this July, that was specifically laid out in statute to be granular. But otherwise, when we share information out like that to another organization, they have to comply with our same confidentiality provisions, which is not reporting granularity below 10 taxpayers. In this case, it would be 10 renters or 10 landlords, depending on which slice of data you're doing. But we do and would continue to have an agreement that got signed by the recipients about who exactly is going to be seeing this data, how will it be published, if it's going to be published publicly, things like that.
What specifically did Act 181 ask you to do that's problematic?
Sure. It asked for each unit, is it American Disabilities Act accessible? And we're not collecting data for each unit.
Yeah.
The year built of each unit, we're not collecting data for each unit. And then the gross monthly rent, which is the hardest one and the most complicated one, and the most problematic one. First of all, we're not collecting data for each unit. And second of all, if you do have landlords start reporting that, then you enter in a world of tax information. And, I think we would have our general counsel come back to talk about all the considerations on that.
Yeah. And just, this extends beyond this specific topic, but just in general, I'm adding some context because, tax department is new to this committee, but we generally find ourselves in a challenging position when we are asked to collect data on our tax forms that we don't care about as tax administrators, because we don't do verification on that data. And often there are other stakeholders and other agencies or out in the world that really care about that data and the quality of it. So we're kind of in a weird position of how many, do you want us to be I'm just talking about the global you. Does the world, the state want us to be diverting staff time away from our mission, from administering taxes, from getting credits out to people to do verification work on data fields that are meaningless to us? It's not our favorite thing to do, for sure. And we also don't like being, part of a system where we're giving junk data to policymakers, because you guys need the data for important reasons. So, just noting that landlord certificate compliance is a thorn in our side for administering the credit, it would be a thorn in the side of a universal data collection goal, I think, as well.
Do you have any particular plans for dealing with the discrepancy between what you think you can do and what Act 181 is asking you to do?
Yeah, we're talking to VHFA later this week to try to figure out what's possible and revise that section.
We have a miscellaneous tax vehicle in the House that we're hoping could be an opportunity to make some changes there.
Members of the committee, actually, I would want to ask, is Jill here? Jill, do you want to add anything to what's been testified so far? Introduce yourself to the committee.
Sure, my name is Jill Renner. I'm the Director of Property Valuation and Review at the Tax Department. It's really different from my colleagues on this section. I'm here to talk specifically about the CAMA data ask. A little more simple and straightforward.
Any questions of these two by the committee? We can discuss all of this later, but of these two. Jill, why don't you come and just, we've got about 5 minutes and hey, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Testimony has been very clear, and Your PowerPoint was right to the point, and this was really useful. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Extremely helpful.
Thank you for having
Thank you.
us.
Yes, thank you.
It's a deeply important issue to us.
Hi.
Hi, guys.
So.
I've got 4 minutes.
Yeah,
You got it?
well, I think, yeah, 4 minutes is good. Yeah, right.
My name is Jill Remick. I'm the Director of Property Valuation and Review, which is a division of the tax department. In the interest of time, my team works with municipalities to administer everything related to the statewide education property tax system. So in the context of this conversation, because I don't think I've been before this committee before, there was a very tiny and very helpful and very straightforward ask in the draft bill. Specifically allowing municipalities to submit to us through their existing channel of grand list data, a few key fields that are in their grand list data at the local level that would be really helpful for us to have at the statewide level and for policymakers to have. So, and I'm here with my colleague Tim Turway from Vermont Center for Geographic Information. We worked together on a pretty sizable bill related to a statewide reappraisal system. Again, in the interest of time, I'll spare you all, but you know, the system of
A
maintaining
little bit
our
about that.
municipal grand list.
Uncontroversial proposal.
So every year municipalities are required to submit a data set to us at least twice a year. Now, generally speaking, there's sort of a constant back and forth with current use data, homestead declaration data, exemption information. But largely speaking, each municipality at their local level maintains their grand list information, which is all sorts of specific information by parcel. And then they train in what's called a CAMA system, so a computer assisted mass appraisal system. So it's literally a software system at their level that they can use. They punch in bedrooms, grade, number of stories, things like that, and use that to set their fair market value. So we collect a lot of information through that from their software system to our statewide system for the purposes of establishing a statewide education grand list. And so there are certain fields that are pretty straightforward that we think you folks would be interested in, that we would be interested in, and that then VCGI could also use to really provide a more robust parcel by parcel picture for statewide mapping. So things that you might assume we already have, like the year it was built, the number of stories that it has, the number of units, which again, as sort of a perennial conversation of how do we literally identify how many housing units we actually have. Believe it or not, we don't actually collect that at the grand list level. We have residential, we have seasonal, we have, we have commercial apartment, which is 4 or more, but we really don't literally have unit by unit. But it is already in the local municipal CAMA system. And it's pretty uncontroversial, right? That's not a subjective question about what year was built.
Years built, the number of units, what else?
Heating system, we thought would be helpful. Year of major renovation, number of units, number of stories. So we thought we would start with just a handful of really, and I think we do have these listed. And again, I think it's on the committee page under my name. There's a larger report that we literally have the table of what we would be asking for. But the key is this would be really helpful information. It already exists. It's not asking a municipality to fill out yet another different survey or collect this a different way. It's when they're submitting their grand list information to us twice a year that we would tack on these specific fields and we could collect them and provide them to VCGI and to you folks.
VCGI.
Sorry, Vermont Center for Geographic Information.
Sorry, can I ask a quick question? Was it year of last major renovation, or if there are multiple years of major renovations, would those?
The most recent.
Okay.
Right. So the idea just being that at any point, that each year you all and we all would have the most current up-to-date actual picture of our housing stock. And Vermont Center for Geographic Information we had some conversations over the summer with the CAMA vendors, so the software vendors that work with municipalities. And these are broadly shared fields. We would want to make sure that we implemented some really clear standards of what the definitions are to make sure we're all talking on the same page. But this is not asking for additional work. This is setting a standard and then collecting it. So hopefully that's relatively smart.
Questions of Jill? Actually, Jill, you just gave us a lot of important information in the space of 4 minutes.
All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank
Right,
you.
really. I think we should have a break. Don't you?
Yeah.
I think I would be able to concentrate better.
Collect any
We have
camera
witnesses coming in, as you know, at 3.
You do collect camera data from
Yeah,
someone's already.
Right.
You're just asking for a
What?
different
Yes, three,
snapshot.
Additional
I know,
fields,
so-
literally just plain your built stories.
Yeah,